Yeah, so thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation, for accepting my abstract. So I would take you through a project which I have been involved in. That's on resilience and resistance in their everyday lives, understanding PCVE interventions in the lives of those living in areas deemed Al-Shabaab extremism hotspots in Kenya. So I had to tweak it to have this word. The project was more focused on the word to resist in resilience. Yeah. Yeah. So I'll take you through the introduction, methodology, what Kenyan context entails, and the local perspectives on to resist in violent extremism, and also perspectives on what is this resilience and resistance in understanding PCVE programming, that is preventing and countering violent extremism. So to give an overall I have put Kenya there for those who have not known Kenya. So it's in Africa. So preventing and countering violent extremism approaches to counterterrorism aim to reinforce individual and communities' practice of resilience to resist violent extremism. So it's a very, it's two terms, very politically loaded at times, yeah? So when we talk about studies on resilience to violent extremism discourses, we rarely acknowledge individual and collective political agency and reduce their resisting acts to merely adapting to, coping with, and mitigating an external threat. So that has been like the cornerstone in many PCVE programs in Kenya. So to understand, so the understanding of individuals and local community acts by contextualizing their resistance within the ongoing PCVE processes relates to these characteristics of many localities deemed as what we call hotspots. Now again, hotspots is a political labeling. In Indonesia, we call it red spots. Yeah? So it's also a political labeling on how states label particular locations known to have high levels of Al-Shabaab radicalization and recruitment. So this entire presentation is based on a project which a concluded project, that is Gender and Resistance to Violent Extremism, Untold Stories of Everyday Resistance to Violent Extremism in Kenya. So it was funded by the British Academy's Tackling UK International Challenges program. So our focus was to understand how local communities have a greater control of the so-called resisting what they consider as violent extremism. Their construction of understanding this term to resist violent extremism. So, overall, we understood when we talk about resistance, that context of to resist, sometimes it may not fit precisely on what is at the local context. So you have PCV program coming from outside, teaching us what to resist on one end, and then local communities have their own understanding of what is to resist. So overall, so when we look at resilience, the component of to resist within resilience, we come across what to resist. That's violent extremism, so which we know it's an ill-defined concept, it's a political-laden concept, and if you look at Kenyan context and many African contexts, it's very much tuned towards Islamist extremism, and also it's, so when you look at violent extremism, within this Islamic extremism is tied to local context, history, and issues to do with marginalization. So the methods we had was, so it was a team effort with the University of Leeds, University of Coventry, and Technical University of Mombasa. That's where I come from, part of. Yeah, so it was an 18-month study, and we had 2 stages. So one was in-depth interviews with 67 male and female participants from areas, as I said, deemed as hotspots for law enforcement defined violent extremism locations. Yeah? So the second stage was based on the first stage. We had a second stage of art-based workshop, which in itself we found as a resisting type of methodology for people to talk and explain. So we had 10 male and 10 female participants, which we had to do separately because majority were Muslims. And it was 5 days in one place. So there were a lot of ethical concerns with it. So we had to have a counselor with them. Then we had to have safety for them. That safety doesn't mean law enforcement type of safety, but safe spaces for these people, because they were also running away from law enforcement type of. So it was 5 days of, I could call, stress for researchers as well, to look after them safely until the project is over. So those were some of the methods where you use a technique called body mapping, where you draw your body and then give meanings into the context on how they feel what is violent extremism, how they feel what to resist, how to resist, everything within that art and the environment. So you have the individual and the environment within a canvas. So I would discuss on that later if you're interested on the tool. So just to give you a context on Kenya. So in our study, we found radicalization, violent extremism as political-laden concepts dictated by those in power. So like many other countries in the global south, these discourses were very much dominated by PCVE, that's preventing and countering violent extremism agendas of donor projects from the West. So we had a whole sequence of projects coming in order to counter the threat of Islamist extremism. That's from Al-Qaeda, later Al-Shabaab, and at presently Al-Shabaab and the Islamic State. So we had a whole sequence of attacks since 1980s, starting from the PLO in 80s, and then Al-Qaeda. That's in 1990s, late 1990s. Then with the advent of Al-Shabaab with the Siad Barre regime in Somalia, we had a lot of recruitment and radicalization drives in Kenya, and mainly the coast region and the northeast region were very vulnerable. And then we have also cells which are from the Islamic State, that is splinter groups from Al-Shabaab now making their way all the way up till Mozambique. So we have a history of Islamist extremism. So we also have the National Strategy for Countering Violent Extremism from 2016, highly flaunted, well-funded strategy from the West. Again, even though implicitly or explicitly it's not said Islamist extremism, but it focuses heavily on on countering Islamist extremism. So it is hailed as a successful template for the global south. So being process, I'm also proud, it's a very nice strategy, but we also contest it can have broader meanings for what we define as violent extremism and what they also highlight as resilience to Islamist extremism. So when we talk about, to give you a bit of from our findings. So when we understood or when we asked participants what it meant to resist, so we had so many which came across. So we had many who spoke about individual and collective forms of resistance in line with Islamist extremism. So we had particular words like deviating from Islam, deviating from the right Islam, this is not right Islam. So a lot of wordings that said it's not the right Islam, then capitalizing on innocence. So that meant people resisted. They understood it from a religious angle of it's not the correct thing, so you need to resist at an individual level. And then we also have collective resistance, like this is a picture of a mother. You will see a sad mother wearing black, but it's not, black is not only for sadness, you know, we wear the black hijab and everything. So she's a Muslim, Arab Kenyan, Arab ethnic group. So her son gets recruited in the mosque. Then because the son used to spend a lot of time in the maskani, those are the bases. And so she shows her story, and she shows how sad she is, how she had to, you know, save the son and also save herself, because these are localities known for, you know, high number of radicalization and recruitment. And now she is not only did she save the son, who had gone into the network, but also now she's saving other kids in the region. So individual and collective forms of resistance in her this thing. So she says that's how she sees resilience, by resisting these type of encounters. Then we also have this picture from, again, a participant. And I forgot to give you an idea on this participant. These are all individuals who are from this particular hotspot. They had some form of connection with Al-Shabaab. Maybe the brother is involved, or the sister is, the uncle is involved, some form, and part of them, some would even call a bit of sympathetic attitudes towards these extremist networks. So in this context, you will see his picture depicts what violent extremism is and how to resist. So he very nicely explains that when you talk about resisting violent extremism, it entails resisting different forms of extremism, what they identify as violent extremism in a particular locality. Like you have Islamist form of extremism that's getting into Al-Shabaab and things like that. And then you also have police violence. That ties into our previous presentation of state-led. So he says both are violent extremism to me, because I see my friends getting killed, my relations, so both are forms of violent extremism. So how do I draw a line? So I'm trying to resist both. So which one should I resist? Yeah? So, and then this is a person who grows up with these criminal gangs, juvenile gangs in that particular locality. So he says, because of these trends, young people are drawn into joining these terrorist networks. One is you're hating the state abusers and practices, and on the other side, there is the we strangers waiting as welcoming you. So they are tied. These gang members are in between these two forms of resistance. So you have the good and the bad resistance. Again, I will talk about what good and bad means to people as well in the community. Then this is another picture of a youth who explains resistance in line with survival, and it ties to the presentation in the morning by Professor Grossman, who also said to survive is also a form of resisting and being resilient, because these are areas with gangs. If you are in a gang, you're safe, even safe from the police sometimes because of that gang dynamics. So he says it's mainly because we have no jobs and education, and gangs looks after us, and that's the form of resistance he's talking about. So it could be negative for us, but it is their form of survival strategy. Then this is also very interesting in how we looked on resistance. So this youth says to resist violent extremism in Islamist extremism and terrorism means should not forget how local communities resist structural marginalization in the coastal region, where people find it, because this is a person who lives in a place where he has to come to the mainland through a ferry. And you spend around 2-3 hours just by crossing, you see. So in the morning to come to work, you are up from 4 a.m. and you may end up coming around 8 to your workplace. So their lives, and going home. So their lives are tied to the ferry. So he gives his description of what marginalization is, how regions are marginalized. And he said, you might tell us to resist Islamist extremism, but we have other issues which you need to address. So we may be quiet there, but we are not quiet on how we are treated. Yeah? Then this is also another perspective of what resistance was in the local community. Now, this is a person who may resist Islamist form of extremism, but he is very sympathetic to the secession type of movement, which is there. We call it MRC, Mombasa Republican Council. So the movement is to secede from the mainland Kenya, main Kenya. So he says he is against Islamist form of extremism because it's violent and all that, but he says he's sympathetic to this cause. And now MRC is an outlawed group in Kenya, and some of these members were also linked to Al-Shabaab movement. So you see how people define resistance in this local. So this also ties in very well to another party which was there in the history that is called Islamic Party of Kenya. where many who were in the movement were among the first groups who went all the way and joined Al-Qaeda. So you can see, because you can't have dissent, so you have no option according to them, so they get into this type of movements. But that doesn't mean the entire group, but few of them who were there. So he says these movements can pave way for people to join into extremist movements like the Al-Shabaab. Then resisting ethnically motivated violence. Now, again, this is a person, individual, who resists Islamist extremism, that is joining Al-Shabaab, but he doesn't resist ethnically motivated violence in the same locality. Okay. So you can see in the same how he sees resistance in the. Then this is the gendered aspect of how, because of countering violent extremism strategies, how people are, how they face as Somalis in the context, how because of police abusers, and she says she resists by sometimes being quiet, sometimes making humor, just to have her way through. So I have just 1 or 2 minutes, so I'll skip. So overall, what our study found out was this aspect of to resist, the word to resist as good resistance and bad resistance. So good resistance is what the state defines as good. Others all fall as bad resistance. So how do we draw this line? So we have narratives that shows one saying, when I talk against Al-Shabaab, okay, state is okay with me. But when I talk about how I'm abused by the police and law enforcement, it's bad. So how we are labeled bad and good within these resistant struggles. Then also how state and donor projects floats this good citizen and good resistance in this entire resilience discourse. And so when you focus on the good and the thing, you forget the micro issues that affect people in the for joining these type of movements. I'm going very fast. So when we talk about good and bad resistance, it also gives us this moral compass of how we should be within this Islamist extremism discourse. So what is good, what is bad is already dictated to us. Yeah. There is a lot of literature, and this is an article in writing, so I will look forward for your comments and perspectives that will nourish the article. Yeah, so basically concluding. Sorry, taking 1 extra minute from you.